The doctors believed I was unconscious. My wife believed I was dying. My children believed they were about to become rich. They gathered around my hospital bed, not to pray, not to comfort each other, but to decide who would get what after I was gone. They thought I couldn't hear them. They were wrong. I heard every lie, every plan, every betrayal. And instead of letting them know I'd survived, I decided to let them believe they had already won. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't exposing the truth. It's giving people just enough time to bury themselves with their own lies. My name is Matt Harris, and 6 months ago, I believed I had everything a man could ask for. I owned a successful logistics company in Southwest Florida. I'd spent more than 2 decades building it from nothing. No investors, no wealthy parents, just long days, sleepless nights, and the stubborn belief that hard work eventually pays off. By 58, I finally had the life I'd chased for years. A beautiful home, financial security, a wife I'd loved for almost 30 years, 2 children I'd done everything to provide for, and a stepson I'd never treated like anything less than my own blood. Looking back, I wasn't wealthy because of the money. I was wealthy because I believed I had a family worth sacrificing for. Turns out, that was the biggest mistake I ever made. People always ask if there were warning signs. Honestly, I wish there had been. It would make what happened easier to understand. But that's the thing about betrayal. It rarely announces itself. It hides inside ordinary days, a smile across the dinner table, a casual conversation, a hug before leaving for work. Everything feels normal until one day it isn't. The morning of my accident started exactly like hundreds before it. Coffee, emails, a quick kiss goodbye from Sandra. She reminded me not to work too late. I promised I'd be home for dinner. Neither of us knew. One of those promises would never be kept. The day disappeared into meetings, shipping delays, and customer calls. Owning a logistics company meant solving problems from sunrise to sunset. By the time I finally left the office, the parking lot was almost empty. I remember checking my watch. 9:43 p.m. I remember thinking how nice it would be to get home, eat whatever Sandra had left in the fridge, and finally get some sleep. Those were the last ordinary thoughts I'd ever have. I was less than 15 minutes from home when the traffic light turned green. I eased into the intersection. Then, 2 headlights exploded across my windshield. A pickup truck came flying through the red light. There wasn't enough time to react. The impact sounded like a bomb. Steel twisted around me. Glass shattered in every direction. Then, silence. The police later said the other driver never touched his brakes. Witnesses called it unavoidable. Doctors called my survival a miracle. The local news described me as being in critical condition. My family rushed to the hospital. Friends filled the waiting room. Employees called every hour asking for updates. Everyone believed I was fighting for my life. The truth was stranger. I wasn't fighting. I was trapped. At first, there was only darkness. No pain. No light. No sense of time. Then I heard it. A steady electronic beep. Voices. Footsteps. Medical equipment moving around me. I tried opening my eyes. Nothing. I tried moving my hand. Nothing. Panic spread through me. I could hear everything, but my body refused to respond. A doctor spoke. "Brain activity is encouraging," a nurse answered. "So there's still hope?" Hope. That word became everything. If they knew I was still aware, they'd keep trying. I just needed someone, anyone, to realize I was still there. A few minutes later, the room became quiet. Then I heard the door open again. Several familiar voices walked inside. Sandra, Carl, Eva, Adrian, my family. Relief washed over me. They're here. Everything's going to be okay. I couldn't have been more wrong. Sandra asked the first question. How long before we know for sure? The doctor explained that recovery was uncertain. Maybe days, maybe weeks. No guarantees. Then he added something that changed everything. If his heart were to stop, we need to know how aggressively you'd want us to intervene. There was a pause, a long one. I expected my wife to say, "Do everything you can." Instead, she quietly asked, "What would you recommend?" The doctor explained the options: life support, resuscitation, a do not resuscitate order. I waited for her to refuse. She didn't. Then I heard the sound of a pen touching paper. My wife had just made a decision about my life, without knowing I was listening. And what my family said after the doctor walked out was far worse than anything he could have told them. The pen scratched across the paper. Just a few seconds, but it sounded louder than the heart monitor beside me. Sandra had signed the DNR, a do not resuscitate order. If my heart stopped, the doctors would let me go. I wanted to scream, to move, to force my eyes open. Anything. But my body remained perfectly still. I was trapped inside myself, listening to the woman I'd trusted for nearly 30 years decide I wasn't worth fighting for. The doctor offered a few words of sympathy before leaving the room. The door clicked shut. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Carl broke the silence. "So, what happens now?" His voice wasn't emotional. It was practical, like he was asking about a business meeting. Sandra sighed. "The doctor said we wait." Adrian answered almost immediately. "If there's no improvement, we'll have to start making decisions." We. That word hit me harder than the accident. Not hope. Not recovery. Decisions. Eva finally spoke. "I hate hospitals. I don't even know why we're all sitting here." Carl gave a quiet laugh. "Because people expect us to." A few of them chuckled. I lay there connected to machines, and they were making jokes. That's when something inside me changed. Up until that moment, I still believed there had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe everyone was exhausted. Maybe fear made people say strange things. I kept searching for excuses. They kept giving me reasons to stop. Carl pulled a chair closer. "You know," he said, "Dad always planned everything." I wonder if he ever updated the will. Sandra didn't answer. Neither did Eva. But Adrian did. He updated it a few years ago. My heart skipped. How did Adrian know that? I'd never discussed my estate with anyone except my attorney. Not even Sandra knew every detail. Yet Adrian sounded confident. Almost too confident. Carl leaned forward. "So who gets control of the company?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "The executive team can keep things running for a while." Then he added, "But eventually, someone has to take over." There was a brief silence. No one questioned who that someone might be. They already knew. Sandra finally spoke. "Matt always trusted you." She wasn't talking to Carl. She was looking at Adrian. "I know he'd want you to protect everything he built." Protect it? The irony almost made me laugh. The man she'd just nominated to protect my company was already talking like it belonged to him. A nurse walked into the room. Everyone immediately changed. Sandra wiped away tears that hadn't been there seconds earlier. Carl lowered his head. Eva stared at the floor. Adrian folded his hands. They looked like the perfect grieving family. The nurse smiled kindly. "He's lucky to have all of you here." Sandra squeezed my hand. "We're not leaving his side." The nurse smiled. "I can tell." The second she walked back out, the performance ended, just like flipping off a light switch. That was the moment I realized they weren't grieving. They were acting. The next few days followed the same pattern. Doctors, nurses, visitors, silence. Then my family would arrive, and the conversations would begin. Carl talked about finally buying a house. Eva wondered whether Sandra would keep the family home. Adrian discussed upcoming board meetings, as if my return wasn't even part of the conversation. No one asked, "When will Dad wake up?" Instead, they asked, "What happens if he doesn't?" There's a difference. One question is about hope. The other is about opportunity. On the fourth day, I heard Carl talking on his phone outside my room. He thought he was far enough away. He wasn't. "I'm serious," he whispered. "It won't be much longer." A pause. "No, the doctors don't expect much." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, I've already started looking at waterfront homes, using money he hadn't inherited, from a father who wasn't dead." That conversation erased the last excuse I had left. That evening, I made a decision. If I survived this, I wouldn't confront them. Not immediately. Angry people make mistakes. Patient people uncover the truth. And if my own family was willing to talk this freely while they believed I couldn't hear them, what else had they been hiding? I wasn't going to ask. I was going to find out. On the 6th morning, everything changed. I heard nurses rushing into my room. Someone called my name. Matt? If you can hear me, try to move your hand. I focused on my right index finger. Every ounce of strength I had went into one tiny movement. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the nurse gasped. I saw it. Another doctor rushed in. Matt, can you do it again? I tried. This time, my finger moved, just enough. The room erupted. Voices, footsteps, machines, hope. For everyone else, it was the beginning of my recovery. For me, it was the beginning of something else, the truth. An hour later, I finally opened my eyes. My family rushed into the room, crying, hugging me, telling me how much they loved me. I smiled back, because they had no idea. The man lying in that hospital bed already knew exactly who they really were. The first face I saw was Sandra's. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she rushed to my bedside. Oh my God, you came back. She wrapped her arms around me so tightly. Anyone watching would have believed she'd never stopped loving me. Carl was next. You scared us, Dad, Eva kissed my forehead. We thought we lost you. Even Adrian stepped forward with a relieved smile. It's good to have you back, Matt. If I hadn't spent 6 days listening to them, I probably would have believed every word. The doctors surrounded my bed, checking my pupils, asking simple questions. Do you know your name? Matt Harris. Do you know where you are? The hospital? Do you remember the accident? Just before it. That part was true. Then the neurologist asked the question that changed everything. Do you remember anything while you were unconscious? Every eye in the room shifted toward me. Sandra, Carl, Eva, Adrian. They were all waiting. I looked confused, shook my head slowly. No, I don't remember anything. The relief on their faces was almost instant. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. That one answer convinced them. Their secret was safe. Over the next 2 days, the doctors focused on my recovery. Broken ribs, a fractured shoulder, months of physical therapy ahead. They called me lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt awake. For the first time in years, I wasn't just listening to what my family said. I was paying attention to what they didn't say. Sandra never mentioned the DNR. Carl never brought up the company. Adrian avoided talking about work unless I asked. They were careful now. Not because they'd changed, because I was watching. 3 days later, the doctors discharged me. As Sandra drove us home, she filled the silence with small talk. The neighbors can't wait to see you. Everyone's been praying. You need to stay away from work for a while. I smiled. I think you're right. She glanced at me and smiled back. Perfect. She believed I was exactly the same man who'd left home a week earlier. She had no idea. That man had never walked out of the hospital. The house looked exactly the way I'd left it. Family photos lined the hallway. Vacation pictures covered the walls. Birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings. Every frame told the story of a happy family. Now, they looked like evidence, not memories. Evidence of a life I'd believed was real. That evening, Carl stopped by. Dad, don't even think about work. The executive team has everything under control. Before the accident, he couldn't go 2 days without calling me for help. Now suddenly, he wanted me nowhere near the office. Interesting. Then Adrian arrived. He carried a folder. Just a few documents you might need later. I noticed something immediately. He never offered me the folder. He kept it in his lap the entire visit, almost like he didn't actually want me reading it. After they left, Sandra brought me my medication. You should get some sleep. I'll clean everything up. She kissed me on the forehead and headed downstairs. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. When I was sure she was asleep, I quietly walked into my home office. The accident had left me sore, but I could move far better than anyone realized. I opened my laptop, logged into the company system. Access denied. I frowned. Tried again. Wrong permissions. That had never happened before. Not once. As owner, I had unrestricted access. Someone had changed my account. The next morning, I called the IT manager. Not through the office, on his personal phone. "Brian, it's Matt." There was a long silence. Then he lowered his voice. "Mr. Harris, I've been trying to reach you." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean? I've sent emails, left messages. I thought someone would have told you." "Told me what?" Another pause. Then he whispered, "Your permissions weren't removed by accident. They were changed under Adrian's authorization." "I didn't say anything," Brian continued. "I questioned it. He told me it was temporary while you recovered. And if I asked any more questions, I'd be looking for another job." I thanked him, hung up, then sat there, staring at the phone. Adrian hadn't been waiting to take control. He'd already taken it. While I was lying in that hospital bed, he was locking me out of my own company. And somehow, he'd expected I'd never notice. That was his first mistake. Instead of calling him or confronting anyone, I opened my contacts and searched for one name: Ray Bennett, the best corporate attorney in Southwest Florida. We'd met years earlier during a merger. He wasn't a family friend. He wasn't connected to my business. He owed loyalty to no one. Exactly what I needed. When he answered, I said only one sentence. "Ray, I think my family has been preparing to replace me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Can you be in my office tomorrow morning?" "I'll be there." The next morning, Ray placed a thick folder on his desk, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Matt, before we go any further, there's one question I need you to answer. How much do you trust your stepson?" Ray Bennett's office overlooked the marina. Normally, I would have admired the view. That morning, I never looked out the window once. My eyes stayed on the thick folder sitting in front of him. He didn't push it toward me. Not yet. Instead, he folded his hands. "Before we open this, I need an honest answer." I nodded. "How much do you trust Adrian?" The question caught me off guard. I raised him. I paid for his college. I made him vice president. I trusted him with every major decision in my company. Ray held my gaze. "So, you trusted him completely?" I answered without thinking. "I did." He gave a slow nod. "Then this is going to hurt." He opened the folder. The first document was a company authorization log. At first glance, everything looked normal. Routine approvals, vendor payments, shipping contracts. Nothing unusual. Then Ray pointed to a highlighted line. "This authorization happened while you were on a business trip." I looked closer. The signature belonged to Adrian. "So?" "He approved a payment without board approval." I shrugged. "I gave him authority to handle smaller expenses." Ray flipped the page. This wasn't a small expense. The transfer totaled $86,000. I frowned. Maybe it was an emergency. I thought the same thing. Ray slid another document across the desk. There was no emergency, no equipment purchase, no freight contract. The money had gone to a company I'd never heard of, Cooper Logistics, LLC. "Have you ever done business with them?" "No." "Ever heard the name?" "Never." He leaned back. "Neither had your accounting department." He opened another section of the file. The same company appeared again. And again. Different dates. Different amounts. Always just small enough to avoid attracting attention. 22,000, 38,000, 15,000, 41,000. Individually, they looked ordinary. Together, they painted a very different picture. "How much?" I asked quietly. Ray didn't answer immediately. He turned one final page, then slid it toward me. Estimated loss, $517,400. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. $500,000. Not stolen overnight. Not by accident. Slowly. Patiently. Over 3 years. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was disbelief. There has to be another explanation. Ray nodded. I hoped there was. So I hired a forensic accountant. He handed me another report. Every payment had been traced. Every invoice verified. Every approval documented. There were no accounting errors. No misunderstandings. Someone inside my company had built a system designed to steal without being noticed. I already knew the next question. Who approved the transfers? Ray looked down, then back at me. Adrian. The room went silent. I stared at the name, hoping it would somehow change. It didn't. Ray wasn't finished. Every fraudulent transfer required a second authorization. I looked up. Mine? He slowly shook his head. No. He handed me another stack of documents. Each one carried the same signature. Sandra, my wife. 11 approvals. Over 3 years. Every signature matched perfectly. I felt the air leave my lungs. This can't be right. I wish I could tell you it wasn't. For nearly 30 years, Sandra had signed birthday cards, Christmas presents, mortgage documents, and anniversary letters. I knew her handwriting better than my own. These signatures were real. There was no denying it. She hadn't accidentally approved one payment. She'd approved enough of them to make the fraud possible. Ray let the silence settle. Then he spoke again. I also had someone look into Cooper Logistics. He slid over a business registration. The company had been created 3 years earlier. No employees, no warehouse, no trucks, no legitimate business activity. Just a mailing address and a bank account. A shell company, built for one purpose, to receive money that didn't belong to it. I rubbed my forehead. Who owns it? Ray turned the final page. The registered owner wasn't Adrian. It wasn't Sandra. It was another name. A man I'd never met. Who is this? Ray answered quietly. On paper, he's the owner. But we believe he's just a nominee. A front. So who's really behind it? Ray met my eyes. We're still proving that. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time, this felt bigger than family betrayal. This was fraud. Organized. Calculated. Criminal. Someone hadn't simply taken advantage of my accident. This plan had started years before I was ever in that hospital. The accident had only made them feel safe enough to speed things up. Ray closed the folder. I need your permission. For what? To dig deeper. Bank records, property records, phone records, everything. If we do this, you're probably going to learn things about your family that you can't unlearn. I didn't hesitate. Do it. As I stood to leave, Ray stopped me. One more thing. I turned around. From this moment on, don't accuse anyone. Don't change your routine. And whatever you do, don't let them know you're investigating. Why? He gave a faint smile. Because guilty people make mistakes only when they think they're safe. Driving home, I replayed every conversation I'd had with Adrian over the last few years. Every promotion, every bonus, every compliment. Had any of it been genuine? Or had I been training the man who was quietly stealing everything I'd spent my life building? I didn't know. Not yet. But I was about to find out. 2 days later, my private investigator called. His voice was unusually serious. Matt, I found out where some of the money went. I asked him, who has it? There was a long pause. Then he said, you're not going to like the answer. Frank Dolan had spent 25 years as a homicide detective before becoming a private investigator. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't exaggerate. If Frank said he had something, he had proof. When I walked into his office, he didn't waste time. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. I followed the money. Then he looked me straight in the eye. I wish that was the worst thing I found. Inside the envelope were bank records. The shell company Ray had uncovered, Cooper Logistics, LLC, had been moving money almost as quickly as it received it. Instead of one large transfer, the money was broken into dozens of smaller payments. Different accounts, different dates, different banks. It was designed to disappear. But someone made a mistake. One transfer led to a personal account. Frank tapped the statement. This is where the trail starts. The account belonged to someone named Scott Wheeler. The name meant nothing to me. I've never heard of him, Frank nodded. I figured. He reached into another folder. This is why. He handed me a photograph. A man in his mid-30s, athletic build, clean cut, standing outside an upscale fitness club. Still, I didn't recognize him. Then Frank placed another photo beside it. This time, Scott wasn't alone. Sandra was standing next to him. They weren't talking. They weren't greeting each other. They were holding hands. I stared at the picture, waiting for my mind to reject it. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was taken at the wrong moment. Then Frank quietly placed another photograph on the table. Dinner. Different clothes. Different day. Same two people. Another photo. A hotel lobby. Another. A beachside restaurant. Another. Scott kissing Sandra goodbye in a parking lot. The photos covered nearly 14 months. This wasn't an affair that had just started. It had become part of her life. I leaned back in my chair. Oddly, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was exhausted. The woman I'd spent 30 years trusting had somehow found time to build an entirely different relationship without me noticing. Frank broke the silence. Scott isn't just her boyfriend. I looked up. What do you mean? He also received money from Cooper Logistics. My stomach tightened. How much? Frank flipped another page. Just under $90,000. The transfers were labeled as consulting fees. There was one problem. Scott wasn't a consultant. He was a personal trainer. There was no legitimate reason for my company to be paying him. Not one. So, I asked quietly, the stolen money helped finance the affair? Frank nodded. That's what the evidence suggests. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. The business I'd spent decades building had been paying for another man's vacations, his dinners, his hotel rooms, without me ever realizing it. Frank reached for one final folder. I've got something else. Inside were phone records, thousands of text messages, late-night calls, weekend trips that conveniently matched the dates Sandra claimed she was visiting friends or attending charity events. Every lie was documented. Every excuse had a timestamp. I closed the folder. When did this start? Frank answered immediately. About 14 months ago. I did the math. 14 months earlier, Sandra and I had celebrated our 29th wedding anniversary. She'd given me a handwritten card. It said, "Here's to growing old together." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the memory suddenly meant something completely different. As I stood to leave, Frank stopped me. "Matt, there's one question you haven't asked." I turned around. "What? Does Adrian know about Scott?" The room became quiet. I hadn't even considered it. Frank answered anyway. "Yes, we have photographs of them meeting. Not socially, not accidentally. Meeting. Several times. Without Sandra." The puzzle suddenly became much bigger. This wasn't just a cheating spouse. This wasn't just a dishonest executive. The people closest to me weren't keeping separate secrets. They were protecting each other's. That explained something I'd been wondering ever since waking up. Why no one seemed surprised in the hospital. Why everyone spoke so confidently about the future. They already trusted each other, because they'd been working together long before my accident. That evening, I sat alone in my home office. The house was quiet. Downstairs, Sandra was watching television. Every few minutes, she'd call upstairs, asking if I needed anything. I answered the same way every time. "I'm fine." And for the first time in weeks, it was true. Not because my life was getting better, because the confusion was disappearing. The lies were finally starting to make sense. Before going to bed, I called Ray. "I want to move forward." He didn't ask what had changed. He already knew. Instead, he asked, "How far are you willing to go?" I looked toward the hallway, where framed family photos still covered the walls. Then I answered, "All the way." The next morning, an accountant from my own company asked to meet me in secret. He said he'd been trying to warn me for almost 2 years, but someone kept making sure. I never got the message. His name was Glenn Ferris. He'd worked in my accounting department for almost 11 years. Quiet. Reliable. The kind of employee most executives never notice, because he never gave them a reason to. When Glenn called asking to meet privately, I knew it wasn't going to be good. People don't risk their careers to schedule secret meetings unless they're carrying something important. We met after business hours at a small diner 20 miles from the office. No company employees, no familiar faces, just 2 cups of coffee and a man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't touch his drink. Instead, he placed a flash drive on the table. "I've been waiting a long time to give this to you." I picked it up. "What's on it?" He took a deep breath. Everything they didn't want you to see. When I got home, I locked myself in my office. The flash drive contained hundreds of files, financial reports, internal emails, approval logs, deleted spreadsheets. Glenn hadn't just kept records, he'd built a timeline. One document immediately caught my attention. It was titled, Unauthorized Payment Summary. The first entry dated back nearly 3 years. The last one, just 4 days before my accident. That wasn't a coincidence. Someone had become much bolder after I was gone. The next file was worse. It contained internal emails between Adrian and several department managers. One message stood out. Don't copy Matt on this. I'll handle it. Another read. Route all financial approvals through my office until further notice. That wasn't temporary leadership. That was control. Slowly, quietly, he'd been pushing me out of my own company long before the crash. The deeper I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Employees who questioned unusual payments were reassigned. Managers who asked too many questions were left out of meetings. Some eventually quit. Others simply stopped asking. Fear had become part of the company culture. And I never noticed. Because every problem was solved before it reached my desk. Or so I thought. The following morning, I met Glenn again. This time, he brought printed copies. I didn't keep these because I wanted revenge. I kept them because I knew one day you'd ask the right questions. I looked at him. Why didn't you come to me sooner? He gave a tired smile. I tried. He pulled out copies of emails, meeting requests, voicemails, messages sent directly to my office. None of them had reached me. Every single one had been intercepted. Who stopped them? I asked. Glenn didn't answer immediately. Then he slid one final document across the table. It was an internal email from my executive assistant. The subject line read, Per Adrian's instructions. Beginning the week after my accident, every request to speak with me had to be approved by Adrian first. He wasn't just running the company, he was controlling access to me. That explained why everyone kept saying, we tried to tell you. No one ever actually could. I sat there, trying to process it all. The affair, the shell company, the stolen money, the forged approvals. Now this. It wasn't chaos, it was strategy. Every move had one purpose. Isolate me. Control the company. Take everything before I realized it was happening. Before we left, Glenn looked at me and asked, What are you going to do? I smiled for the first time all week. Nothing. He looked confused. They think I'm still recovering. They think I don't suspect anything. I'm not taking that advantage away from them. Because the biggest mistake guilty people make is believing they're smarter than everyone else. Once they believe they've won, they stop hiding. And that's exactly what I needed. One more mistake. 3 days later, Ray called. We're ready. The divorce papers are complete. The fraud package has been delivered to the state attorney. The sheriff's office is waiting for your decision. I looked out the window. Sandra was watering flowers in the front yard. Carl had just pulled into the driveway. Adrian was walking up the front steps carrying a bottle of wine. They looked like a normal family, getting together for dinner. I almost smiled. They had absolutely no idea. Their time was running out. Then I remembered something. The following Saturday, Sandra and I were supposed to celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary. She'd been planning the party for months. Friends, neighbors, business associates, nearly 50 guests. The perfect celebration, or the perfect stage. I picked up the phone. Ray, I've made my decision. There was a brief pause. What is it? I looked through the window, watching my family laugh together. Tell everyone to be ready next Saturday. I'm ending this, in front of every person they've been lying to. 1 week later, my backyard was filled with champagne, music, and smiling guests. Hidden just outside the front gate were 2 sheriff's deputies, holding arrest warrants with my family's names on them. By Saturday evening, my backyard looked exactly the way Sandra had imagined. White tablecloths, string lights hanging from the oak trees, a live jazz trio playing near the pool, champagne chilling in silver buckets. Friends laughed, neighbors mingled, business associates congratulated us on 30 years of marriage. To everyone else, it looked like the perfect celebration. Only 3 people knew the truth: Ray, the lead detective, and me. Sandra walked over carrying 2 champagne glasses. She smiled. We actually made it. 30 years. I looked at her for a long moment. We did. It wasn't a lie. We had made it, just not to the future she was expecting. Carl arrived looking more confident than I'd seen him in years. He shook my hand. You look great, Dad. Guess you're tougher than we thought, I smiled. Funny. So are you? He laughed, completely missing what I meant. Eva hugged me tightly. I'm really happy you're okay. For a second, I almost believed her, because unlike the others, I could still see guilt in her eyes. Not innocence. Guilt. There was a difference. Adrian arrived last. Perfect suit, confident smile, expensive watch. The image of a successful executive. He handed me a bottle of wine. 30 years deserves something special. I accepted it. It certainly does. Neither of us mentioned the company. Neither of us had to. We both knew tonight wasn't about anniversaries anymore. By 8 o'clock, nearly every guest had arrived. People gathered near the patio. The music faded into the background. Sandra touched my arm. Should we make a toast? I nodded. I'd love to, she smiled, still believing this was her celebration. I picked up my champagne glass, tapped it gently with a spoon. Clink, clink, clink. The conversation stopped. Every face turned toward us. I looked around the backyard. Friends I'd known for decades. Employees who had helped build my company. Neighbors who believed they knew my family. Then I began. First, thank you all for being here. This has been a difficult year. As most of you know, I almost didn't survive. Several guests nodded. Someone quietly raised a glass. I continued. The doctors believed I was unconscious. They were wrong. Sandra's smile faded, just a little. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. But I could hear. The backyard became silent. I heard every doctor, every nurse, and every conversation my family thought I would never remember. Carl's expression changed first, then Adrian's. Sandra slowly lowered her glass. I heard people discussing my company, my house, my money, my future. While I was still alive, a woman near the front covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." I looked directly at my family. You thought I was gone, but I was listening. I reached beneath the table, picked up 4 large envelopes. Each one had a name written across the front. Sandra, Carl, Eva, Adrian. I have one final anniversary gift for each of you. No one moved. Finally, Carl forced a nervous laugh. Dad, what is this? The truth. I handed Sandra the first envelope. Inside were photographs, hotel receipts, phone records, every meeting with Scott, every lie she'd told. Beneath those lay the divorce papers, already signed, already filed. She looked up at me, tears filling her eyes. Matt, I'm so sorry, I calmly asked. For which betrayal? The affair? Or helping steal my company? She couldn't answer. Next, I turned to Carl. His envelope contained bank records, transcripts of his conversations outside my hospital room, documents ending his employment, and one final page. My new will. He stared at it. You cut me out? I nodded. You inherited exactly what you earned. Silence. Eva stepped forward before I even called her name. She already knew. Inside her envelope were copies of the payments sent to her business. The emails. The financial records. She burst into tears. I was scared. I made a terrible mistake. I believed her. That didn't erase what she'd done. But it mattered. Sometimes remorse comes too late. Sometimes it's still real. Finally, I faced Adrian, the man I'd once introduced as my son. I handed him the last envelope. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. I know what's inside. I nodded. I think you do. He slowly removed the documents, the shell company, the forged property records, the fake power of attorney, the forensic accounting report, the criminal complaint. His hands began to shake. Before he could speak, the front gate opened. 2 sheriff's deputies walked into the backyard. The detective followed close behind. He stopped directly in front of Adrian. Mr. Collins, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges including grand theft, fraud, forgery, and filing fraudulent legal documents. The detective gently took the folder from Adrian's hands. You have the right to remain silent. The backyard froze. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the click of handcuffs. As the deputies escorted Adrian toward the gate, he looked back at me. Not with anger, with disbelief. He honestly thought he was the smartest person in the room. He was wrong. The detective turned toward Sandra. Our financial crimes unit will be contacting your attorney. Then Carl. We'll need a formal interview. Finally, Eva. You'll be contacted as a witness. One sentence. 3 lives changed forever. The weeks that followed were difficult. Sandra and I finalized our divorce quietly. She never challenged the evidence. There wasn't any point. Carl left Florida. We haven't spoken since. Eva reached out months later. Not asking for money. Not asking for forgiveness. Just asking for a chance to rebuild what she'd broken. We're working on it, slowly. One honest conversation at a time. The company survived. Not because of me alone, but because the employees I'd overlooked chose integrity over silence. People like Glenn. People who could have walked away, but stayed long enough to protect the truth. They're the reason I still have a business. Looking back, people always ask me the same question. What was the biggest betrayal? The affair? The money? The fraud? No. The biggest betrayal was believing that love alone was enough to protect trust. It isn't. Trust isn't something you give once. It's something people have to earn over and over again. 6 months later, I walked into my office for the first time without anger, without fear, without questions. The lies were gone. The investigations were over. The truth had finally caught up with everyone. And for the first time since that night in the hospital, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. If this story proves anything, it's that betrayal rarely happens all at once. It grows quietly, hidden behind familiar faces, comfortable routines, and people who believe you'll never look too closely. But the truth has a way of surviving. Sometimes, all it takes is one conversation that was never meant to be heard. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, let me know where you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next one.